broadcast of community library training. Happy New Year also. I think that when we were trying to plan for the program, for this program, we were very aware that it was going to be the 2nd of January, and we kind of thought ahead to try and do something that would be a little bit of a forecast into 1975. And I couldn't think of a better way to lead into 1975 than to ask the guest who's with me in the studio, to ask Dick Engen to talk about library planning and long range. And I told him I might throw him a bit of a curve and ask him for a crystal ball. Dick, if you had a crystal ball right now, what kinds of things would you predict for library development in Alaska in 75?
Well, Sheila, obviously one of the first things that we're going to see in libraries in 1975 is a rather great expansion of building of new library facilities. At the general election last fall, they did pass the $7.9 million bond issue to assist with public library construction throughout the state. Also, I guess if I were to take a look at the crystal ball, it's always a happy thing to try it, I would say that it may be by the end of the year that we will have our first printed book catalog of the Alaskana material from the University of Alaska collection that is available for lending throughout the state.
Okay, last broadcast, Phyllis Nottingham was our guest just before she was on her way to Hawaii. She referred to that briefly, but we didn't talk about it in detail. Do you want to expand on it a little bit? I know that everyone who's been working on it can't wait for it to come out, but...
Yeah, I always get too wrapped up in trying to explain what it is. What it does is the State Library will be encoding the information off the catalog cards of the Skinner collection, which is the Alaskana material from the University of Alaska Library.
Right.
Now, encoding means you take this information on your catalog card, the author, title, subjects, publisher, and so on, and you actually put it into a method so that the computer can actually read it. Mm-hmm. Then the computer takes it in Washington, State Library in Washington, which is already using this in their Washington Library Network, and manipulates the pieces of information all around so that we can get a printout that's a listing by the author of the book, by the title of the book, or by any of the subjects. Now, this is our first attempt really to have a computer-produced book catalog available. The great part about it is instead of a catalog being located in one place at the University of Alaska, it can be anywhere in the state that there's a person who wants to use it, because it'll be in printed format, and you know, the book will actually come out, and the person in Petersburg can come in, take a look at the book, and decide, hey, there's the book I want. There are more books by that author.
What I'm thinking that makes this really exciting, and I'm kind of like you, I really hope that it happens in 75. Many of the students who are involved in our program, when we even use the term catalog, I think the first thing that comes to mind when we're involved in the library is card catalog. You know, and in a way, and their card catalogs are giving them some trouble in some cases because they have told me so. But in the case of catalog this time, it's in hand and you can hold it, right? That's what we're thinking of.
Kind of like a Sears Roebuck.
That kind of catalog.
Books or the materials that are available.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Magnificent. I'm going to take you back to the first thing you mentioned, if you were going to do your crystal ball, because I think it's probably very significant. We have never touched upon the impact of the November bond election. We haven't discussed it. We haven't discussed what it might mean to the students who are involved in this training program. And what really, just briefly, I think it's something that you could probably get very involved in and discussing. We promised ourselves we wouldn't in detail. But what about this bond issue, and what does it mean to small communities? And also, I'm going to ask you to talk about the major resource centers, the two major.
Okay. Well, maybe before I try to say what it means to the small community and the large community, I would like to just quickly say, and I hope we can get into it later, that there's a long-range plan for library development in Alaska. It was first written in '68. And what it calls for is establishment of regional resource libraries and regional research libraries. Now, these large libraries, such as in Anchorage, Fairbanks, and Juneau, will have a large collection of books for shipping out regularly to the smaller communities in each of the regions, the northern region, the south central region, southeastern region. So that what is available in the local library is not limited at all to what they have on their shelves, but what will be coming in effect, every month from the major resource library. So it can flow through there, and as long as it's needed and being read there, it stays there.
On a deposit kind of thing.
basis. If they want to keep it longer, they can keep it longer. If they've sent it back and somebody wants to reread it, go ahead, send back in for it. We'll get it for you on interlibrary loan.
I think you've just explained one of the things that probably there were more questions about for people who were not familiar with the long-range plan and with the regionalization plan. There were some questions in the minds of those who didn't really know. And I don't know if I'm referring to questions on the part of our students, but some questions about why the major portion of money for the Anchorage area and the major portion of the money for Fairbanks. And I think you've answered it by saying that the regional libraries are there.
Well,
the regional resource centers.
The regional resource center libraries. Yeah, it's something that at first glance probably isn't as clear as it could be. That is, let's take Nome as a for instance, or Allakaket or Kotzebue. Those libraries, no matter how large a building, in effect, we can put out there as a realistic basis for providing services, unless we have a steady flow and a ready, very quick access to large amounts of material, the building isn't going to be a library. You know, you build a new library, you really shouldn't say that. You build a new library building. The library is the use that's made of it. It's what's inside that structure, the walls you put up.
I often make reference, Dick, to some of the things that we discussed when all the students were in town and we had the workshop here. And I know you had a lot of obligations during that period of time, but maybe, do you remember this being discussed? It was a little bit heavy the way we approached it first. We started talking about standards, and I fully didn't know what our students were going to do with them, because these were the official interim standards. And we kind of left it open and up to the discussion leaders, telling them that if they cared to throw out the standards, we were talking about building collections at the time, if they cared to throw them out or modify them, that it was fair game, but that we at least should be examining them. And much to, I don't know whether it's delight or surprise or whatever, but when the recorders reported back to us in that process, they didn't really quarrel with the standards. What they said was, and it made me think that you must have been having the same type of local library participation in this plan, because what came out was, yes, we ought to have, especially we were talking about the broad range of materials. Yes, we definitely should have access to recordings, and if we can't have them at our level, then we should be able to get them from our Regional Resource Center library. Yes, we should have a broad range of periodicals, and if we can't, you know, the same kind of thing. It made me think, it made me very pleased, because all of these people know I'm new to this state. It convinced me that people at the local level had been involved in the plan.
Well, I'm glad to hear you say it, because we sure hoped they were. When I first came up to Alaska in '67, one of the first things that seemed an absolute necessity was to get an overall guide so that we'd know where we wanted to be. We know we're not going to go anywhere near as fast as we want to go. It always happens. That's too bad, and you know, we always want to do more things than what we can this year. But what we felt was so important was those things we did do were the ones we wanted to do. So that when we took a look, 8 years after, 10 years after, we were on the road and to some of the points that we wanted to be. And although it may have taken us longer to get there than we liked, we're there, and we can go on. I think there was, quite frankly, through the Alaska Library Association and the local community libraries and library boards, a great participation in developing, because, you know, the long-range plan, the state library can sit in splendid isolation. We can sit in Juneau, and we can determine what's the best. We can read all the books, and, you know, we've got lots of ideas of what we can do. But what we determine isn't necessarily what the people actually providing the service in the local communities really do need. So there is an attempt, I think, at the State Library always, and certainly there was then, I'm glad to hear it came out that way, to involve those people. You know, after all, what we're trying to do is provide, you know, I think the title of our long-range plan was Library Services for All Alaskans. And one of the unique things in Alaska, and perhaps the people don't realize it as much, you notice it when you come from other states sometimes, is in Alaska there's no competition between type of library.
Oh,
we don't really care if it's a school child who needs the material, or if it's a college professor, or if it's a businessman, or whoever it is. We only care that they need some information. And whatever library in the state has it, it will be sent to them.
I have said this, I have a feeling somewhere before in the series of broadcasts, but out of all of the things that impressed me, this impressed me the most. We didn't have to worry about knocking down the barrier of whether or not, well, this is my community college material, or this material is mostly for the 6th grade class. And the feeling of, well, maybe the first manifestation of that is that we have public and school community libraries. And is that about as old as libraries in Alaska, or where are we kind of going with that?
Well, if you look at the rest of the country, and I hope this doesn't get voted somewhere else, there is not a great support for the concept of a community school library.
Still very controversial as an idea.
And in many cases, it doesn't work, because there is a conflict of what? People who are supposed to be using it. That in schools normally are located off the main street. They're normally located where you wouldn't want to put a public library. Public library should be in the one single spot where the most possible people will go by it and see it every day. Because that's where it's going to get used the most. People see it. I mean, how many people are dedicated library users? Not that many. How many can get something from the library? Almost everybody. And if you keep pointing it at them, if you have a storefront in a shopping center, and you got little kids sitting in that storefront, and they're sitting in there reading books and sprawled out on the floor, and the adults are in the back room doing some research, you're going to draw in an awfully lot of people who really only came down to go to the bank or to go to the grocery
get
store.
milk,
They're going to
right.
come in. So there is a conflict often. In Alaska, we look at our smaller communities, and it just doesn't, in a sense, often make practical sense to have two libraries in the same community, one for the school, one for the public. The encyclopedia
And when
serves both.
when we can consider the size of population that we're dealing with, we can't justify two structures in the first place.
No.
And is it true that the school is often the real, if you were to choose a single center of smaller communities, isn't it often the school?
It often is the community center. We're in favor, I guess I would say, at State Library in terms of the bond issue. We're in favor of joint use facilities. Fort Yukon, we happen to have a delightful library up there. It's
I'd
in
really
the
like to
community
see
hall.
that.
They got beanbag chairs and rockers in there, and a television with a video cassette going in the back. And it's really an alive, dynamic library, really doing things for the people there. And it's in the community hall. Nice thing. Those are the only showers in town. That's where the laundromat is. Boy, do the people come in, and while they're washing clothes, they can be in using the library.
Absolutely.
And that's what library should be, a part of what's going on, not
Absolutely.
something in splendid isolation in the center of the park with a beautiful green setting that keeps you away from all the hustle bustle of the traffic and so on.
I guess that's one problem Alaska doesn't have, is that the library that you just described. We kind of make a point out of trying to relate what we say, Dick, to assignments. And I hope that doesn't, you know, I don't want that to be constricting, but it just happens that we're talking about assignments. And this is sometimes a little threatening to the students when I say, and here we are on page 43, and they go, gasp, oh, Sheila, you know, we're not that far. And I know that many of the students aren't. In the Loyola course, however, in the lessons in the range of 36, and so forth, students are asked to comment directly on long-range plan, and a couple of the questions that I made direct toward you, and we're not in the habit of giving direct answers, you know.
I'm very good at not answering anything directly.
Okay, because they are students, and they don't, you know, we're not, this isn't a spoon-feed operation, but one of the questions what is, in this context of planning and the relationship in library development with a state agency, is what is some of the reasons a state provides grants or state aid to libraries? And now, without answering that question, why don't you answer a question for me, which is, I understand that our state agency is involved with a state support that amounts at $250. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, give me a little background. You and I haven't talked about this, so in a way, see, that's not really answering the question, but what is it we do with this kind of administration of grants?
The $250 reimbursable grant and aid, quote unquote, and it's written that way in the state statutes, is provided to local library associations, nonprofit corporations organized for providing library services to the public. It's $250 as a reimbursable grant. The local jurisdiction or library association spends the $250 in buying books or library materials, periodicals, records, if they want. And then they send us the invoices, and we give them the money back, in effect.
Right.
So the $250, what the attempt obviously is, and you know, the reason the state is an involved governmental jurisdiction in local library service is because education, as such, is primarily the responsibility of the states. It is in all the states. A library is certainly an integral part of any education system. So therefore, the state's involvement in public library service is a very real and a quite legitimate one for the state government to be very deeply involved in providing local public library services. A good many of the services of the state library are provided to the local jurisdictions. The processing center, which processes books for 28 small member libraries, is a direct service. It isn't giving them money, it's providing them with catalog materials
In a way, it's almost
already.
giving money. Don't we all realize a lot higher discount when we
Oh, yes,
when
yeah.
we buy in
it saves
volume
them money, in effect, so they get more. I shouldn't say that. Never say that you're saving money. What you're doing is you're getting more for the expenditure of the public funds.
because of the high rate of discount.
Right, the higher rate of
Buy in
discount.
volume.
Because, and they do not have to do the work of actual processing. Why do we have to if 10 libraries buy the book,
By the same
are 10
title.
libraries going to have to decide what's the author's name, how do you really spell it, here's the title, and type up the cards and so on. So there is a great saving in terms of that too. And what it does is it provides more public service time. The librarian does not have to spend her time behind the scenes cataloging the books. The librarian can be out there helping
Doing the
person
traditional,
who's
yes.
coming in needing some help and really getting the material for him.
Okay, he was classic. You were classic, weren't you, and not answering?
And
It's magnificent. Okay, this one we know we're into already, and that is, I guess we've answered it. The question says, does your state have a plan for statewide library development? When was it developed and by whom? Gee, we've kind of touched on that.
do you want me to provide specific answers?
Listen
on that?
to the-
I always like if I can give a
The
real answer.
yes-nos are easier, aren't
A
they?
frustrated reference librarian, is an awful thing to have on a program like this. They want to provide you with those
Okay,
answers,
all right,
especially
all
if you've got
right.
one you can
How do you
give.
like this one?
I
In
don't.
not more than 100 words. Summarize the progress made in implementing this plan, and then very cleverly, because Joe has only left about 1.5 inches, he says attach an additional page
Attaway, Joe.
for your answer.
Before we discuss the long-range plan, or as we discuss the long-range plan, perhaps it would be a good idea here to differentiate between, quote, long-range plans.
Okay.
Because, in a sense, if I understand correctly, Sheila, you have sent out to them a yellow volume. I think, as a matter of fact, we've got a slide for it, haven't we? A yellow one that says Long-Range Library Development 1973 to 78.
I call that the butterfly one. That's the one.
Butterfly one.
They do have a copy of that,
Okay,
and
now,
that's the only one they have.
Okay. That particular plan is a plan that is required by the federal government for participation with Federal Library Services and Construction Act funds
Right.
to be submitted each year. We revise it. It's 73. We drop off the year we're in when we get to the end of it, or the year we were in, and add another year on to keep a constant, well, it's always up to date in terms of a long-range plan. Well, that's one long-range plan. I won't say it's not limited at all, because that's actually the current one that we're really working on. But the one I was mentioning originally was the Library Services for All Alaskans. Now, that plan was developed by Public Administration Services under contract for the State Library in 1968. The Alaska Library Association adopted it. And that is the basic overall plan that we have been following.
I wish I had distributed that to the students, and maybe I can, because reading that particular one is much more lively.
Well, yeah, and that plan is a cohesive unit. That is, it gives the overview. Why do we have library services? Where are we now, and where are we trying to go? It doesn't give the specific steps, step 1, step 2, steps 3, step 4, which is in the butterfly plan. Those are the specific items we have to do, but that's one of the reasons why it doesn't read in the
As
same
well,
way.
maybe it is.
Because it is specific steps, item 1, 2, 3, 4. Whereas the other one is the overview that these specific steps fit into.
I guess I also like the philosophy that comes out in that particular one. Some real care had gone into the wording, and the expression of philosophy is so obvious. And it was, well, I'm sure a member of your staff sent that to me before I came, and it was from there that I thought, wow, got very excited about. And we've already touched on the fact that no barriers, no heavy, lengthy discussion of type of library and primary clientele and jurisdiction and so forth.
I'd like to say one of the delightful stories I remember the developing of this. Phyllis Dalton, who was formerly Assistant State Librarian in California, you probably know Phyllis. She's a great gal. She was the consultant on this program. And she traveled all around the state. And she was in Nome, and she was going out to get in the limousine to go out to the airport. And as she went out to get in the limousine, one of the local businessmen came running out of his business and said, "But Mrs. Dalton, I haven't finished telling you what we need in library services here."
Oh,
so he
wow.
rode out to the airport with her to explain more of the things that they wanted in Nome.
She must have been delighted with that kind of a reception.
Yes, she really was.
She must have felt that it was really worth it. Well, that kind of excitement then is, I guess, what really comes through. Well, classic, as we expected this to be when you and I got started talking, our problem wouldn't be filling it up, it would be shortening it. I would like to have us break right now. I know that Betty Watson is in Petersburg, and it's possible that the gals in Nenana are there, and maybe Tanana. I heard the weather forecast this morning, and if they're not, I don't blame them at all. If they're there, I'm worrying about them almost. But why don't we stop for a moment and break for interaction? I have a question for Betty, and I want her also to respond to anything that we have been saying. I understand you two saw each other recently, more recently than I've seen her. But let's pause and give the people who are maybe receiving us live a chance to pick up with some questions or comments. Well, Dick, that's part of the experiment. We never really know if we're going to talk to someone or if we're not going to get a chance to. And I always, whenever there's a guest on the program, I always tell them that because people didn't call in doesn't necessarily mean they aren't there. I remember the number of broadcasts where people will drop notes later or even make a long-distance call saying, I was really listening, I heard it all, I was there, I didn't have anything to say, which is legitimate. But when we sit here, we're not sure.
Well, we just provided all the information. They didn't have any other
no
questions to ask, right?
That might be a false security. I'm not so sure about that. But something that I didn't mention to you, what I was going to say was the videotape copies of the broadcast are being distributed, so many people view the program from that point of view, so it isn't just the live part of it, as you well know. I didn't mention this to you, but I mentioned it in the last broadcast. I'm going to say it again, and that is that for those members, the students who plan on attending the Alaska Library Association conference in Kodiak, we have made arrangements to, Sunday morning's an off time during the conference. I haven't talked to you about this, have I? Okay.
No.
Sunday morning is an off time in the conference, and several of us thought it would be fun if we would schedule an opportunity to just kind of do a brainstorming session. So we have made arrangements, at least we've gotten ourselves on the program, and we haven't done much more than that right now, to have an informal get-together at 10 o'clock Sunday morning, or wait, 9:30, I think it is, 9:30 Sunday morning, and an opportunity if they want to bring their course books and so forth to do that. And we'll just do a brainstorm. Did you have this? I didn't get this. Was this question hard? And that kind of thing. And so I want to mention that now so that by the time our cassettes get bicycled around, people will be reminded of that. The other thing is something that you are aware of, and that is that we're trying to compile a brief notebook that's descriptive of the program, which we've asked Brooke Sheldon to take with her to Midwinter. And so I issued a little plea to the members of the Institute to send photographs of themselves, of patrons, of their community, of anything, with the only thing it had to be a gift. I wasn't sure that they could get it back. And we have received some really good photographs from a couple of the participants. Time is of essence on that, so I'm issuing that plea again. And I had to get those two little comments in. They have nothing to do really with the topic of our, of our discussion. But I'm going to ask you to kind of, maybe we've got a few minutes left. If you could give advice, Dick, to the people who are in this training program, or maybe to people who are in community libraries in general, about how they can continue their involvement and what kinds of things we can look at in terms of planning, not just for 75, but even longer range. What kind of involvements can they anticipate?
I guess I'm not really sure. You mean in continuing it, in further workshops?
I'm sorry, it was a little vague. No, I'm thinking in terms of library development. And they obviously have been involved in the past. And you and I were mentioning just briefly the program that some of our people went to in the WICHE conference. Right.
Continuing Education Program. Yeah, network is such a wonderful word because it covers
we can use it for
everything you want to cover on network.
That's right, and no one can quarrel.
Matter of fact, we've even, we've got the Alaska Library Network. I'm sure they can't read it, but it shows Alaska Library Network. I'm not sure who invented the term, but it fits. And what it says is that we're tying all the resources together in order to give everybody in the state the best possible shot at it. One of the things the State Library does do to a very great extent in an attempt to tie together a 586,000 square mile state is to publish materials that are indexes to that which is available, the combined periodical holdings that I think almost all of the libraries would have, the Songs and Legends, which
Mary Matthews mentioned, but it's now, is it out?
It's
I mean,
out.
You've got it in your hand.
This is a copy. You can have it here. Have a copy of Songs and Legends.
My first copy, great. Okay, because what Mary just showed was only the cover, and she said it's coming, so here it is.
It's actually out, and it's being mailed out this week now. And this is an index to the cassettes that are available of the oral literature project of the Alaska Library Association.
Great.
The state and local publications. I know it sounds very dull.
No, it's not dull.
But when somebody wants a question, they want to know, how many salmon did we catch in Southeast Alaska last year? In this one, it's going to tell you that the Department of Fish and Game put out an annual statistical report, which will help you get the you people out there, get the information to answer it.
To request through us
to
and
request
so forth.
through.
That's right.
And there are depository libraries in other parts of the state, in Anchorage and Fairbanks, in Ketchikan, of all state publications, as well as other parts of the United States.
Great. Now, the plan with this, just briefly, I don't have a lot of time left, the plan with this is to duplicate the cassettes and make them available.
Right. They can request those from us.
And we've had the Songs and Legends before, but this is the first index.
That's right.
Am I right? Oh, that's great. I can envision all kinds of ways for that to be used. That's grand. Dick, thanks for being the first program for 1975. And I think we know we kind of jumped ahead in terms of the fact that we got way ahead in the course book, but it looks like a good time. It's the resolution time of year and so forth. And thanks for being our guest. I have a feeling that our students are going to want copies of this. They're probably going to go back and say, now what was it he said? So thanks very much, and we'll see these people in 2 weeks.